This is gonna be funny. It's Jordan Peterson, a white Canadian dude, and some white gal talking about uh, how fatherlessness affects Black Americans, which, if you really cared about like the destruction of the Black family, you would be against like the war on drugs and racism and stuff, because that's the reason it happens.
We could extirpate the dysfunctional underclass culture. And that is something that is tearing down Blacks' potential to succeed by embracing this oppositional culture that says that academic effort and achievement is acting white.
The only time I've been considered acting white is by other white people who look at me and be like, "Oh, you're Black. You should be speaking Ebonics." But I don't, so they're like, "Oh, you're acting white."
It glorifies criminality, glorifies conspicuous consumption, misogyny, maximal procreation, having as many children as you can by
That's same thing that you can find in, white families. What is she talking about? Misogyny? Like, don't talk about misogyny to Jordan Peterson because he's a misogynist himself. And uh, having as many kids as possible, that's what Jordan Peterson wants.
different baby mamas. If we could get I would say an intervention that was maybe focused less on the cognitive matters and more on simply deferring gratification, self-control, the types of issues that
Self-control? What? She's trying to say what Black people can't control themselves because they like to consume stuff and have kids? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
that Edward Banfield wrote about in the Unheavenly City, that would be the most important thing to focus on, because I'm not sure that efforts to change the cognitive skills gap will be that
The cognitive skills gap. She's trying to say Black people are less intelligent.
successful over time. But really, all we ask is people to respect the law and to restrain their impulses.
To respect the law and restrain their impulses. That's that's the biggest problem of Black America today. Black people can't respect the law and restrain their impulses, unlike white people or any other person you can find in the United States or around the world.
And as you pointed out, the data for, let's say, the Head Start enterprise does indicate very clearly that these wide-scale attempts to increase general cognitive ability did not succeed. What you saw with Head Start was that the children who went through Head Start were more likely to be in the proper grade for their age, and they were more likely to graduate from high school, and they were less likely to become pregnant in teenagehood.
Yeah, because if people is able to start their education early, yeah, they're going to be doing better at school. Though Head Start, not everybody gets to, get Head Start or whatever, or and qualify for those programs, and that's mostly Black people.
But that hope for expanding boost of cognitive ability as a consequence of early childhood intervention it occurred in the immediate aftermath of the Head Start experience, but was obliterated as a general rule by grade 6. All the other kids caught up. And so then there's only two places to go from there, and one is to go even earlier into the intervention, which means you start taking kids away from their family in some real sense at the age of, let's say, 2 or even earlier, and that's a rat's nest and a nightmare of its own accord. Or to understand that, as you pointed out, that there are other
Head Start isn't taking kids away from their families. I mean, it's teaching kids at an earlier age. So the way he speaks about it, it's like kids are being kidnapped by the state from their families to be taught education.
Socioeconomic variables that might be focused on. I think one of the most interesting ones biologically is likely fatherlessness. Like we do know, for example, that girls who don't have a father will hit puberty on average at least a year earlier.
What? No. What studies does he have that shows that um no, the likely cause of early puberty for kids, that happens with boys and girls, is their food and diet and genetics.
Which is substantially earlier, and that indicates a real biological impact of the lack of a masculine figure in the household.
Well, that's weird. He thinks that kids hitting puberty is a sign of lack of a masculine figure in the household. Weird.
Because that's a walloping um, physiological difference. We know that boys who have lack of father at the age of 12 have telomeres. So this is a genetic difference that are on average something approximating 15% shorter, which means that
Okay, is it actually not having a male figure in the household that is causing the shortening of telomerase, or is it uh, food and diet and their own genetics as well, and the environment that these kids are growing up in? Because when you do have a single parent household, either a single mom or a single dad, a lot of times those people have less money, so they live in worse areas in the city, which has a genetic effect.
that all other things being equal, they're already doomed to a much shorter life. And so, and so we don't know what the pervasive multi generational consequences of the breakdown in familial structure in the final analysis are. I mean, it does appear that the Black population has fallen behind on the family integration and stability front since the early 1960s.
Okay, we can go even further back. Okay, let's go with slavery. Okay, the black family was being destroyed and ripped apart by white slave owners. You got the war on drugs, where uh, Nixon wanted it to happen because you couldn't, at that time, make being black illegal. So they uh, created the war on drugs to throw black people in jail. You got segregation. You got various times in history that had a major effect on the black family, but nobody cared until now, where they can use the idea of, the destruction of the black community as something against black people.
Rather than making advances. And it doesn't look like that's good for anyone concerned, given the absolute wealth of data showing how pervasive a problem at every level fatherlessness happens to be. We also have no idea what the consequence of fatherlessness is on the development of general cognitive ability across time.
I find this funny because there people like Jordan Peterson never talks about the effects of motherlessness on people. It's only fatherlessness. And people like Jordan Peterson will also say that single mothers are evil people. And that's the reason why kids grow up bad, because they got bad single parents. And that's why you need a guy in the picture to balance out the evil woman.
There might be a literature on that I don't happen to be familiar with, but it's it is certainly the case that that's another place we might look if we were trying to bolster social stability and eradicate some of the pervasive differences in what would you say general psychological well-being that seem to be associated with race.
Okay, you want to increase the education of black people? Make it easier and more affordable to go to school, increase school funding for public schools, make it so that, public school funding isn't based upon uh, property taxes in the community, because the black communities or black people are mostly more likely than not forced into uh, worse areas because of racism systematic racism of our government. Uh, Black people on average have a ton less money than white people, and so like property taxes or school funding being based on property taxes um, is goes against you know helping Black people uh, make it. There's a lot that can be done if you want to help increase the education of Black people, and pretending that there's nothing that we can do is just bogus.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you're underplaying this as how bad it is. You know, when Daniel Patrick Moynihan wrote his astoundingly prescient report in the 1960s, warning that the country was about to screech to a dead halt with regards to further civil rights progress. His reason was not a resurgence of white racism or changing economic positions in the country, opportunities in the country. His reason was what he saw at the time as a catastrophic breakdown in the Black family. At that point, when Moynihan wrote this report, the out-of-wedlock birth rate for Blacks was 23%. And Moynihan said that with that number of young Black males growing up in single-family homes without fathers to socialize them, to civilize them,
Wow, to socialize and civilize them, because how people like her and Jordan Peterson see it, if uh if Black kids don't have a father, they grow up to be animals. But they don't act the same way when it's when it's a white family, a fatherless white family. They don't say that the white kids grow up to be animals or they need to be civilized.
growing up without the expectation of a marriage culture, this population is doomed. You will not get out of underclass poverty culture, gang culture. Well, what are we at?
Okay, poverty poverty is poverty is not a culture, but that's how people like her want to see it because it's Black people. If you wanna get people out of poverty, well, make it easier for them to get jobs. Make it, make it easier to get education, which would then make it easier to get a job. Or, uh, you know, let's do away with laws that prevent people from being able to work just because of their skin tone.
At today, we're at 71% of what Moynihan was raising an alarm about.
And it's also funny how they act like marriage is the sole thing that is ruining Black America. People, Black people not getting married. It's like, no, that's not the cause of anything. It's just an excuse that they want to solve and act like, they're helping Black people. Nope. Um, make it easier for Black people to get a better education in public school and stuff, and you'll see the rapid rise of Black people in the United States.
So 3 times higher about. And so it is absolutely at civilization destroying levels. And what is as bad, and we know
Wow, the amount of kids Black people are having, or the lack of kids, or whatever, is at a civilization destroying level, and that's hilarious because look around you, civilization still exists.
you say we don't know the cognitive consequences of that. That's probably true. But we certainly have ample data on the fact that kids growing up in single parent family homes are 4 or 5 times as likely to be poor. You know, you say you'd
Well, yeah, obviously because it's a single income. Fa you know, most people nowadays can't really live on a single income, let alone raising one or two kids. So, yeah, they're going to be poor. We could give benefits to single parents and, you know, couples if they have kids. Well, I mean, we already do. We could get better benefits, you know, give all parents access to SNAP and stuff like that, and you would see a rise in intelligence.
be better off being born with a smart parent than a rich parent. I would say you're better off being born with two parents than one.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, you're better off being born with you know, being having a two income household than a single income household. That's just totally obvious because more can be afforded for the kid. So, uh, but eh,
welfare supported single mother who happens to have a larger government income than two working class married parents that
wow, why do you need to attack single parents on welfare? That is that is something that they hate because they believe black people are welfare queens, when in reality, more white people on welfare than black people. Yet they don't talk about how black people shouldn't be on welfare.
are maybe pulling in $25,000 a year. You still, if you're in a Rawlsian position of choosing where you want to end up, you choose the two-parent family over the wealthy single mother.
Mm, But in reality, if you were living with a single parent that, made a couple of $1 million a year compared to a couple that made like, $100,000 to $200,000 a year, you're technically better off with the single parent that made more because you could get more in life. But in this instance, all these people care about is the idea of black people being married and that marriage is somehow the solving factor of everything.
So things are really bad. But the problem is, how do you fix it? And people like you and I have been going around talking about the problem of single parenting. And I was just going to add, the problem is not just for the individual child and growing up without a father, but when boys are raised in a culture that does not expect them to get married before they have children, they are absolved of the types of expectations that can help them become functioning males. And I know I'm in
No, marriage does not correlate with anything about being a functioning person in society. As we can see, there are tons of married people, and they're toxic as fuck to each other. But uh, this chick and Jordan Peterson are trying to like convince people that being married is the sole thing that will save America from uh the civilization destroying levels of like I guess unmarried black people.
your territory here, Jordan, and talking about how do you civilize the the savage male libido. But one way
How do you civilize the savage male libido? You don't need to. What are they? Why? It's funny how they're acting like males are like savage animals that, you know, need constant control. It's like what is going on here?
you do so is say, if you want to make yourself a plausible mate, you have to learn to defer gratification. You have to learn to have future orientation. And when you're growing up in an inner city,
This is funny though because there are complaints, even though they're not, specifically saying, black people need to learn to control themselves and stuff. That's, basically what they're getting at. Especially talking about the inner city and stuff like that. And the title of the video, talking about Black America, uh, it, it, they're just acting like black people are animals, and without like growing up in a with a father, they just become these like wild, savage animals that are just out to like do crime and hurt people. In a sense, they're trying to call them super predators.
and it is absolutely the norm that you can start having sex with girls at age 12, they may or may not get pregnant, but you
But also, like Jordan Peterson is all about like women having babies as soon as possible, especially well anybody on the right is all about that. Um, look at I think it's Logan Bobert who is bragging about her like 17-year-old son um getting a girl pregnant. Nobody cares about, when white people have a bunch of babies. People on the right are telling white people they need to have more babies. But when it comes to black people, it's like black people are having too many babies. But then when black people want abortions, people on the white people on the right are like, oh, you know, uh, the person that started Planned Parenthood was a Nazi, so blah blah blah, which isn't even true. But it's hilarious how they hate black people for having too many kids, but then they don't want black people to be able to like be single and parentless or childless.
you will have no further responsibilities. There is no reason to develop those skills of self-control that make you a plausible worker, a plausible
Hear that, guys? If you don't learn to control yourself and get married, you're not gonna be a good functioning black person in society and be able to work for white people.
husband, a plausible colleague in any kind of voluntary association. So that's the problem.
Okay, this is basically the end of this clip. I'm tired of listening to their veiled racism because that's all it's been is veiled racism about how black people can't control themselves. All they care about is crime and that they're animals and stuff, and that their only saving grace is if they get married. Like, this is just Jordan Peterson showing that he's racist.